most of those guys, I think the majority were in there for heroin.
Oh,
And
okay.
from what the social worker told us, that's because of self-medicating.
Right, right,
That's
right,
because they can't get meds. That's because heroin kills the pain. Heroin is easy for them to get. They can walk down the corner and get
right.
heroin. You cannot get drugs for schizophrenia or drugs for depression, bipolar, or anything like that on the corner. Hey everyone, this is Danny Gold here with Vice News. We're here on the Line. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking today about a piece that we just put up on mental illness in jails in Chicago and sort of the struggles that the city is going through with its mental health resources. We went inside Cook County Jail, which is the largest single-site jail in America, and now, because of budget cuts, is the largest mental health care provider in America as well, with 30% of the inmates having mental illnesses. And that's created all sorts of problems and all sorts of concerns. As you can see in the piece, it's quite devastating, actually. So we're going to take some of your questions right now. Starting off, Mike.
Yeah, Danny, we are starting off with Kate, who's calling us on Skype from Los Angeles.
Hi, Danny.
Hey, Kate. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. So I have a question about the gentleman who was speaking to himself in the mirror and talking to his father. That was a really powerful moment. And you guys touched on it being a therapeutic group to help them, transition into, entering society again. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite things I've ever been a part of. It was extremely powerful. One of the guards was crying. I was tearing up. It was just one of those things that felt so surreal that it almost felt staged. But I think we just happened to catch a really, really important moment. I don't think those moments are that common. I think that we just happened to be there on a day when someone's having a breakthrough. And, having been through therapy myself, having known a lot of other people that go through it because of issues we face with this job and other things, that's rare. We were really lucky to capture that. And yeah, it was definitely something that I still watch and get chills. So that is one of the therapy groups that Sheriff Dart has implemented to help inmates sort of cope with a lot of the issues that they're dealing with. And we sat in for a bit. Some of the other inmates spoke to the wall as well. It wasn't as powerful as I think Samuel was his name, what he said. But it does seem really, really important because I think a lot of these guys have never really gotten that kind of help before, never really been through that before, never had someone listen to them. So to see that happening, I don't know, it felt special. Maybe I'm not 100% optimistic that it's going to make a huge difference. But I definitely left that place feeling like some people who never got care were finally getting the care that they deserve.
Right. So is that it? Like they do this therapeutic, session support group, and then they're just thrown to the wolves when they're out?
I mean, I think
there's no transition program. Like some places do like a pre-release program where, you have a job, they monitor you and make sure make sure your meds, you're at a therapeutic level. This is not provided for them?
I think that's part of their transition out. And I'm not entirely familiar with what exists for them on the outside. I do know that in the past, there's been very, very few resources. I think Sheriff Dart is working with advocacy groups and other sort of transitional groups to help, look for jobs, or look for temporary homes or things that you mentioned, like halfway housing. Yeah, things of that nature. But it's a struggle. These budgets are being cut even more, and these groups are suffering. And there's only so much that you can do when you're inside the system, like Sheriff Dart, looking for resources on the outside. But I do know there are partnerships. I do know he's in contact with these groups, and I do know they're trying to do as much as they can. But I do think, and this is just an opinion, all too often people are just sort of thrown to the wolves, as you said.
Right. Okay, so that kind of brings me to my next question. Once they're out and they're released, and as the sheriff said, a lot of them, it's this, vicious cycle. They end up right back where they were because they don't have the resources to get their medications. Did any of the inmates specify whether medication withdrawal had anything to do with their arrest or charges?
Well, I think when we were at the intake center, Most of those guys, I think the majority were in there for heroin. And
Oh, okay.
from what the social worker told us, that's because of self-medicating.
Right.
That's because they can't get meds. That's because heroin kills the pain. Heroin is easy for them to get. They can walk down the corner and get heroin. You cannot get drugs for schizophrenia or drugs for depression, bipolar, or anything like that on the corner. You can get heroin. So that's a big issue.
It's a shame.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, well, thank you, Danny. That was all I really had to ask.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah.
I actually forgot to show it. I'd love to show the clip that we have of Samuel going through that process in case you haven't seen it, because it really is that sort of powerful a situation. So can we roll the clip, guys?
You know, and all the hurt that I did to other people, man, I believe it was a direct result, man, from all the stuff, man, that I didn't get out of you. And then to top all that off, when they called me and they said that you had passed, they told me, man, I had all the rights to pull the plug on you. You had gave that right to me. How can you get that right to me? And I ain't been no son. You know, these are things I wanted to tell you, man. I'm just, you know, I forgive you. You know, I know you probably wasn't the best dad, man, but I forgive you, man. So today, man, I'm a better man, man. I'm getting better. Realize, man, I don't have no resentment. I love you. I'm not disappointed in you, man, because, you know, you did what you could. I love you, Dad.
So thank you so much, Kate, for joining in, and thank you for pointing out that scene, because I do think it's extremely powerful. I think next.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I think next we're going to go to Terrell.
Yeah, we are going to go to Terrell, actually. So Terrell is calling us from Brooklyn. Let's say hey to Terrell real quick.
Hey, Terrell, what's going on?
What's going on, Danny? It was actually, I really enjoyed looking at your piece, and one of the things that I noticed right away, and I want to ask you if you saw this, did you consider that there was a great deal of privilege behind the policy rationale of why so many of half of these clinics were closed in Chicago? Many of the people you spoke to said that it required 5 or 6 bus rides to get to a clinic. And so the politicians were telling us, oh, well, there are still clinics in the city where people could go to. However, these clinics required half of a person's day to get to. And no one really considered the fact that maybe some of these individuals work and that no one could take that much time away from work to go to these places. So did you observe any privilege in these decisions? Because I noticed neither the mayor nor the governor responded to your request to speak to them.
Yeah, no, neither of them did. And, you know, I didn't notice that right in front of you, but I think it's obvious. A lot of these policymakers, you know, are wealthier, are white, are in much better communities. And I think, you know, maybe they're under the assumption that some of these people that are getting treatment at these facilities can just go have insurance or can just pay to go see a therapist or a psychiatrist. And they can't. And even if they could, you know, they don't have cars. You're talking about 3 or 4 bus rides. Sometimes, you know, one of the things that was brought up was they're going through gang territory sometimes, and it's just it's a huge issue. I think we have a clip that explains it. So this was shut down April 9, 2012. It was part of the 6 clinics
Absolutely.
that were shut.
This place has no psychiatrist.
And the place that was here had psychiatrists.
Had psychiatrists, had therapists, and had nurse. And these are all the things that you need when you're dealing with mental health. Just as with the African American community, there's a stigma in the Latin community, in the Hispanic community. Mental illness is not an accepted diagnosis. So if you have a chance to go to a place like this, that is in walking distance, you go.
So Terrell, I actually wanted to ask you about that. For those who don't know, Terrell wrote an amazing article, as a writer, a journalist, and wrote an amazing article on his own battles with mental health about black suicide. If you Google Terrell STARR and black suicide, you'll find the article. And you grew up in a very underserved community without many options and without many resources. So I was hoping, I mean, you could elaborate a little bit about what you went through.
Absolutely. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and lived in a very violent household up until the age of 18 years old before I left for college in Little Rock, Arkansas. And at 12 years old, I was given a .357 Magnum and told that I was a man of the house. I experienced a lot of emotional abuse. So I had a live-in uncle who was a drug addict, and he was seriously addicted to crack cocaine. And he threatened to kill me, my grandmother on numerous occasions. And at one point, he basically threatened to take our lives. And so I reached and grabbed a gun, and I tried to shoot him. But fortunately, there was someone in the house, and they snatched the gun away from me. But I lived with that trauma of living with that drug-addicted uncle for years. And I carried that trauma, did not process it, did not know what was going on with me, but I felt depression all throughout my 20s. And it finally caught up with me at 32 years old, 33 years old, and I made out a plan to commit suicide. It just, all of the trauma and all of the anxiety just came up, and I decided I wanted to end my life, and it was something I didn't feel like I could control. And I eventually got help, but as I reflect back on that moment, I know that as a kid, I was taught that those types of things were normal. Growing up in violence was normal. Violence was scenery. And there was no culturally accepted way to admit that those experiences hurt you, that those experiences were painful. And I decided to write this BuzzFeed piece, hoping that many people would realize that my strength and my resolve to talk about this issue in order to get help was a sign of my strength and a willingness to confront all of the terrible things that I experienced.
Now, were there resources for you that you were aware of when you were growing up at all in your community for mental health?
Well, no, because in our neighborhoods, we weren't taught that. The thing about it is you are taught to, as men, I was a child who was told at 12 years old that I was a man. And so men deal with those things. Men don't talk about hurt. The concept of resources is a completely foreign thing, because you don't know that you're experiencing pain. You don't know that you're experiencing hurt because you're taught to not think about it. And you only experience this. I only started learning about mental health when I was in my 20s, but I didn't think that I would actually need it. It was only until I lost control of myself emotionally and mentally that I needed help. And fortunately, I had enough resources through my job in order to get the proper counseling. I had to get, in one of my jobs, I required an on-the-job psychological evaluation because I broke down at my job. That's how bad it got.
Well, thank you, Terrell, so much for sharing with us. And if you haven't read his piece already, please do. It's incredibly brave, it's incredibly important, and it touches on a lot of the issues that we're discussing here today and that our documentary showed as well. So thanks again, Terrell. We really appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Terrell, for coming on. And Danny, I got a video message on Skype that I want to play for you. So take a listen to this.
Hi, this is Maeve from DC calling with a question for Danny. I'm actually wondering about bridging the gap between services offered in Cook County Jail and the community. So in terms of mental health services, once an inmate leaves the system, is there any sort of coordination or are there relationships with community health workers or other social safety nets that might be available in the area?
So Maeve, thank you for that question and thank you for sending this video in. I think we touched on this a little earlier. You know, there are advocacy groups like this group called NAMI that we spent some time with. There is some help that Sheriff Dart is trying to coordinate, but I think that those resources are severely limited. And people, you know, continuously fall through the cracks. And from what we understand, there's going to be more budget cuts on mental health. And Sheriff Dart told us himself, he's worried a lot of these groups, their budgets are going to suffer. So I don't think there really is that many resources out there provided for them. There's few actual mental health facilities, but even that, traditional stuff, housing, jobs, things of that nature that really need to be provided for, there's just not that much out there. You know, these people really are left to fend for themselves. And if you're unmedicated and untreated for whatever mental health issues you're going through, that just makes the problem worse and worse and worse, and it's sort of a vicious cycle. I think, do we have a clip? We do have a clip.
I'm here because I'm bipolar and antipsychotic.
I'm diagnosed with ADHD, schizoaffective, and anxiety disorder.
Were you getting help when you were outside, when you were in Chicago?
You know, the only place I know to get my meds is Aunt Martha's. And for me to get to Aunt Martha's from my town to Hazel Crest it was 5, 6 bus transfers and a whole day.
And what's it like for you when you're off your meds?
It's horrible. But that right now ain't my main concern. My main concern is where I'm gonna live. What am I gonna eat? You know, meds are one thing. You know, that's not even. First, I gotta put a roof over my head.
Are you worried?
A little bit, yeah. Because I know, like, I have 3 felonies already, and I've been to prison 3 times. And every time was because I was off my medication, and I ended up self-medicating.
So there you go. That's a perfect explanation of sort of what people are going through. And it's actually strange that because of the way the system works now and some of the programs Sheriff Dart has provided, there's better care provided for people in jail than outside of it, which is, you know, pretty horrific. But thank you so much, Maeve, for sending in that clip. But let's move on to, I think, our next question.
Yeah, we've got Kenya calling us from Washington, D.C. on Skype. Let's say hi to Kenya.
Hey, Kenya.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. I just wanted to know, we're seeing a lot of instances around the country right now of police brutality, and a lot of times the victims of these cases are mentally ill, and unfortunately police officers are the first line of defense for mentally ill people who are left on the streets. And what type of additional training are Chicago police officers, if any, are they receiving for the influx of mentally ill people who will now be in the streets as a result of these closures?
Mm-hmm. So there's something called crisis intervention training, which is a relatively new program, I believe, across the country that some cities are implementing. I know Miami's big on it. I think in Chicago they're doing it as well, which teaches police officers how to cope with mentally ill people. Unfortunately, our request to sort of participate or tag along and film this process by Chicago PD was declined. Sheriff Dart said that his staff had received some of that training. And also, you know, one of the key things we noticed was that they're not exactly correction staff, but that program where the social workers talk to the inmates, the arrestees, as they're brought in and try to evaluate them, that's rare. That's unique, I think, to Cook County Jail, and that's extremely important. I think we have a clip of it right now.
Everybody just want me to die. I just need to die.
Okay, that's not going to happen. Sarge?
Yeah.
I'm going to have him single-celled for suicide watch. I'll notify courts. Okay, come on.
Can you explain to us what just happened with that young man?
Okay, so he's actively suicidal, he's bipolar, he's very, very worried about his case, but more than anything, he's not oriented at time, so some concerns. He's got a plan, he's had several suicide attempts before.
So what would have happened to that young man had he not been screened here right now?
He would probably have a suicide attempt.
So, but it's exactly like you said. I mean, this is a tremendous issue all across the country. I feel like every week I see a story about a mentally ill person being confronted by police and just being shot down in the street or killed, being beaten, things of that nature. I think even literally 5 minutes before I got on this program, I saw an update on Twitter or got an email from someone about that, a new case having happened today. It's a huge issue. I've seen proposals made from everything from having you know, mental health care providers go on the scene when police are aware that it's a mentally ill person, toward just more training for police. It's dire. It's like you said, we've got more people on the street with mental illnesses in underserved communities who aren't going to be given the benefit of the doubt, who police aren't going to know how to talk to because that takes serious training that just isn't made available. Thankfully now, some of this training is starting to take place in cities across the country. I just hope that it's used and that it's respected and that we see far less of these events.
I'm glad you mentioned the, across the country and the fact that this type of training is being respected. I'm actually also curious whether this has a potential or even is at the moment contributing to a prison industrial complex where, a lot of violent offenders are being let off early on their sentences, and now we need beds to fill, especially for private prisons around the country. Is this issue with, imprisoning the mentally ill, is this something that's unique to Chicago, or can we see similar instances in other cities?
I think it's a problem across the country. The studies showing the tremendous lack of beds, it's decreased exponentially, the amount of beds that are provided for mental health care, people with issues with mental health care. And I think it's I know Miami's had an issue. We actually planned to shoot in Miami for a bit. I think it's a countrywide problem. As far as the effect of private prisons, You know, that's not something we looked into for this piece. It is an incredibly important issue. I know there's some great reporting. Two friends of mine, Hannah Rapley and Lisa Rior in Seville, have done stories on private prisons and private probation. You can Google their names and see those stories. I unfortunately am not really up to date on that. But you know, everything sounds like it's interrelated. But also you caught that moment where Sheriff Dart said, you know, violent crimes have gone down. Most of my violent crime units are empty sometimes. We did an interview in an empty facility, but my mental health units, they're always crowded or overcrowded.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for talking to us. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Danny, one thing I want you to take a look at before we close out the show. We got this tweet from Lori, and she wanted to know what questions should journalists be asking about our county and country's jails and their mental health programs. So, you know, what advice would you give to other journalists?
I mean, I think there's a million questions we should be asking. Why is this the case? Who's behind this? Who's profiting from it? Why are these decisions being made? Is it really saving money? Because it comes down to it. I mean, morally and ethically, we know that it's completely horrible. Like, there's no reason we should be treating our mentally ill like this. That's not even a question. But unfortunately, a lot of times it comes down to budgetary concerns. And as we explained in the piece, this is actually costing more. People cut these facilities, higher-ups, governors, whatever it is, policy makers, cut these facilities to save money. And they're actually not saving money. So not only is it like morally and ethically reprehensible, it's actually costing the taxpayer more. And you know, sometimes you can't get through to people on a moral and ethical level. Sometimes you need a financial level. And you know, you look at these two things, it just doesn't make sense. There's absolutely no reason for it. Those are the sort of questions that should be being asked. Like, what is my local jail? What is my local county jail doing for people with mental health? How are these people being treated? Are they cycling in and out? Is it a revolving door? These are, you know, things that really, really need to be called attention to and really need to be addressed. And there are people that are doing fantastic work on that, but I think it's an issue that is solvable in some way. And we should really be hammering it home because it's reprehensible that this is the way that we treat our mentally ill.
All right. Well, that's a great answer to an important question, Danny, and you've made it to the end of the show. So why don't you say goodbye to everybody at home?
Guys, thank you so much for tuning in and for sending us your tweets and your Skype questions. I wish we had time to answer them all. Please tune in next week. We're going to have another fantastic correspondent answering your questions about whatever piece it is that they're answering your questions about. But thanks again for joining us at On the Line, and thanks again for sending in your Skype calls.
In 2012, the city of Chicago, which had run 12 mental health clinics spread throughout the city, decided to cut that in half and make it 6. There was no rhyme or reason. There was no discussion. There was no plan put together. They just cut it. And as a result of it, we found countless detainees here waiting on their trial who would come to me and tell me over and over again, you know, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? I mean, that was my clinic. I don't know what to do.